Good evening. You are listening to Silent Waves Radio. My name is Alex Mercer, and we are interrupting our scheduled programming to bring you what we can only describe, at this hour, as an emerging and deeply alarming situation developing simultaneously across multiple points on the globe. I want to be precise with you from the very first moment, because precision is what this moment demands. What we are receiving right now, through our wire services and through direct contact with field correspondents, suggests that something unprecedented has begun. We do not yet have a unified explanation. What we do have are anomalies, thermal, seismic, atmospheric, occurring in clusters that are too coordinated, too simultaneous, to be explained by natural variance alone. We are going to stay with this story through the night, and through however many nights follow, until we have answers for you.
Alex, thank you. And to our listeners, wherever you are right now, whatever you're doing, I want you to know that we understand the weight of what it means to hear those words on the radio, the interruption of normal programming, the careful voice, the absence of music. We know that combination is never good news. I want to tell you that we are going to be honest with you tonight, even when honesty is uncomfortable, and especially when the picture is incomplete. Right now, people across the world are waking up or going to sleep to something they cannot explain. A shimmer on the horizon in coastal Bangladesh, an unusual red tint to the sky over Nairobi, reports of water temperature anomalies in the Strait of Malacca. These are the early threads, and we are pulling on all of them.
To give our listeners a structural framework for what we're covering, and I want to emphasize this framework will evolve as we learn more. The origin point of all of this appears to be connected to a multinational scientific initiative known publicly as Project Helios Arc. This was a joint climate engineering venture, announced roughly 14 months ago, sponsored by a consortium of 11 nations, including Germany, Australia, Japan, Canada, Brazil, South Korea, and several others. The stated objective was atmospheric carbon sequestration at scale, specifically the deployment of a network of high-altitude aerosol delivery systems designed to reflect solar radiation and theoretically reduce global surface temperatures by an average of 1.4 degrees Celsius over a 5-year period. This was the largest climate intervention experiment in human history. It was controversial, it was debated, and it was authorized.
What Alex just described in technical terms translates, for those of us who aren't atmospheric physicists, to this. 11 nations agreed to spray a very particular chemical compound, a sulfate-based aerosol mixture, into the upper atmosphere using a network of stratospheric balloons and high-altitude aircraft. The idea was that these particles would act like a very thin veil between the Earth and the Sun, bouncing some of that solar energy back into space before it could heat the planet's surface. Scientists had modeled this. They had run simulations. They had published papers. And for the first 11 months, by most accounts, it appeared to be working within expected parameters. Then approximately 48 hours ago, something changed. And we are only now beginning to understand what.
We're getting our first direct report in from our correspondent stationed in Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm going to read this to you verbatim. Quote, "The Java Sea has gone the color of rust. I am standing on the northern waterfront, and the smell is chemical, sharp, nothing like salt. The tide came in 2 hours ago and did not go back out. Fishermen are refusing to go near their boats. Local harbor authority has issued a hold order on all vessel traffic. There is no official explanation from Jakarta's city government yet, but people here are frightened and they are gathering in the streets. The water is not behaving like water." End quote. That report came in 43 minutes ago, and we have not been able to reach that correspondent since.
I need to sit with that for a moment because I think our listeners deserve that. A harbor full of frightened fishermen, a sea that smells like chemicals, a tide that doesn't go back out. These are not numbers or projections. This is someone standing at the edge of the water telling us that the world they recognize has shifted underneath them without warning. And what strikes me about this early hour, Alex, is how universal that experience is going to be over the coming days. The confusion before the understanding. The moment when the ordinary rules of your world, tides go in, tides go out, the sea smells like the sea, stop applying. That moment for the people of northern Jakarta has already arrived.
We're now about 2 hours into our coverage, and the picture is widening significantly. The Associated Continental Press is reporting anomalous atmospheric pressure readings over a corridor stretching from the eastern coast of the Arabian Sea all the way to the South China Sea, a band approximately 4,000 kilometers long and 800 kilometers wide. Within that corridor, surface temperatures have risen an average of 6.2 degrees Celsius in the last 18 hours. 6.2 degrees in 18 hours is not weather. That is not a heat wave. That is something else entirely. And now we are receiving first indications that the aerosol network, the delivery mechanism at the heart of Project Helios Arc, has experienced what sources are calling a cascade reversal. We don't have a full technical explanation yet, but what that phrase means in layman's terms is that the aerosol system may have begun doing the opposite of what it was designed to do.
Alex, before we go further into the science, and we will go further, I want to read a listener message that came in through our emergency contact line, because I think it captures the human reality of what is unfolding right now. This is from a listener who identifies themselves only as a nurse, currently on shift at a coastal hospital in Chennai, India. They write, "We started receiving patients 3 hours ago with chemical burns on their skin. Not burns from fire, burns from rain. The rain that fell tonight had a pH we've never recorded in this region. 2 patients lost vision in one eye. My supervisor told us to prepare the overflow ward, and then he left the room and didn't come back. I am scared, but I am staying. Please tell me someone knows what is happening. We hear you. We are working to find answers."
That report from Chennai is deeply significant, and I want to connect it to what we're learning about the cascade reversal. Preliminary analysis from the Atmospheric Sciences Division of the International Monitoring Consortium, they are one of the oversight bodies for Project Helios Arc, suggests that a computational error in the aerosol mixing ratios, combined with an unanticipated interaction between the sulfate compounds and naturally occurring nitrogen oxides in the upper atmosphere, has produced a chemical reaction that was never modeled. The result is the formation of what researchers are calling a peroxysulfate precipitation matrix, essentially a layer of highly reactive compound in the lower stratosphere that is now descending as precipitation. When this compound contacts moisture in the lower atmosphere, it produces a dilute but chemically aggressive acid rain. That is what fell on Chennai, and based on current atmospheric modeling, it is going to fall elsewhere.
We are now, according to our best estimate, somewhere around 4 hours into the situation as it stands publicly, though the anomalies themselves appear to have begun much earlier. We're getting our first government statement in, and I want to read it carefully because government language in a crisis tells you as much by what it omits as by what it includes. This is from the Office of the Secretary General of the International Climate Science Consortium, the body that authorized Project Helios Arc. Quote, "The ICSC is aware of anomalous environmental readings being reported across several regions and is working urgently with member nations to assess current atmospheric conditions. All aerosol delivery operations have been suspended pending review. The ICSC urges calm and cooperation with local emergency management authorities. A full technical briefing will be provided within 24 hours." End quote. What that statement does not say, what specifically went wrong, how many people may have been affected, and whether the suspension of aerosol operations is reversible in time to matter.
The 24-hour timeline referenced in that statement is, frankly, concerning given the pace at which conditions are deteriorating. Let me walk you through the timeline as we understand it right now. Approximately 96 hours ago, ground monitoring stations in 3 separate locations, Colombo, Sri Lanka, Manado, Indonesia, and Djibouti on the Horn of Africa, registered simultaneous anomalous readings in atmospheric chemical composition. These readings were flagged internally, but were not immediately escalated because individually they fell within the outer margin of what the models had projected as possible variation. It was not until approximately 48 hours ago when a 4th monitoring station in Darwin, Australia registered a reading that broke all modeled parameters that an internal review was triggered. By that point, the cascade had already begun. We are now effectively chasing something that had a 2-day head start on us.
Chasing something with a 2-day head start. I keep returning to that phrase because I think it explains so much of what ordinary people are experiencing right now. The confusion, the sense that the authorities don't quite have the full picture, the way official statements feel slightly behind what you can see with your own eyes or smell in the air outside your window. In Colombo, Sri Lanka, our regional correspondent reports that the city's coastal districts have begun voluntary self-evacuation. Families loading whatever fits in a vehicle. People sleeping in the Vihara Mahadevi Park because the apartment buildings nearest the waterfront have been unofficially deemed unsafe by residents who noticed the exterior walls were showing chemical staining after last night's rainfall. The government of Sri Lanka has not yet issued an official evacuation order for the coast. But the people of Colombo are not waiting for one.
We're now approximately 7 hours into our live coverage. The casualty numbers we're working with are preliminary and certainly undercounted, but we need to put them on the table. Current reports suggest a minimum of 3,400 confirmed dead across the affected corridor, with the majority of those deaths in coastal Indonesia, the southern tip of India, and along the eastern coast of Somalia. The cause of death in most documented cases is respiratory failure following exposure to the peroxysulfate precipitation. In cases closer to the initial atmospheric anomaly zone, which our meteorologists are now calling the primary convection ring, centered roughly above the intersection of the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean, the precipitation appears to be more concentrated. In those areas, the acid levels in rainfall are high enough to cause rapid chemical burns on exposed skin and, in prolonged exposure cases, internal pulmonary damage from breathing the air during peak precipitation events.
3,400. And Alex, we both know that number is going to change. In situations like this, and I recognize there has never quite been a situation like this, but in documented disaster coverage, the numbers in the first hours are always smaller than the reality, because the reality is still happening. People are still in hospitals, people are still in the water, people are still in the rain. I want to take a moment to acknowledge what it means to be a first responder right now in any of these affected cities. In Medan, Indonesia, we have received word that the city's fire and rescue services have deployed without full chemical protective gear, because the quantity needed does not exist in their inventory. Those men and women are going out into rainfall that burns their skin because the people who need them cannot wait for the right equipment to arrive.
We're receiving an updated briefing from a source inside the Meteorological Analysis Group, a body that works in close coordination with Project Helios Arc's scientific committee. I'm going to share what I can verify. According to this source, the cascade reversal is not, at this point, a localized event. The aerosol network, which consists of approximately 4,700 individual high-altitude delivery nodes distributed across the stratosphere between 40 degrees north and 40 degrees south latitude, has entered what this source describes as a runaway resonance cycle. This means that rather than dispersing or neutralizing over time, the peroxysulfate compounds in the upper atmosphere are interacting with each new aerosol release, even from nodes that were theoretically shut down, in a way that amplifies rather than diminishes the reaction. Think of it as a chain that, once started, pulls itself forward rather than requiring a new push at each link. The question our source cannot answer yet is, how long does the chain have to run?
How long does the chain have to run? That is the question that every government, every scientist, every parent standing at a window watching the rain is asking right now. We've been on air for close to 9 hours now, and I want to give our listeners a geographic survey of what we know is currently happening because this is spreading. In Dhaka, Bangladesh, the river levels in the Buriganga and Tarag have become chemically compromised. Water treatment facilities have been shut down as a precaution, which means the city of over 21 million people is now operating without safe water infrastructure. Authorities are attempting to distribute bottled reserves. In Nairobi, Kenya, the red atmospheric tint that was first reported as a curiosity has intensified. The sky above the city is now described by correspondents as deep amber, with visibility reduced to approximately 2 kilometers. Schools and non-essential businesses have been ordered closed.
I want to add a geophysical dimension to what Sierra just described, because the atmospheric changes are beginning to have secondary effects on ocean behavior that are not yet widely reported, but are extremely significant. The thermal anomaly in the Indian Ocean, the surface temperature increase we mentioned earlier, is now being measured at an average of 8.7 degrees Celsius above seasonal baseline across the central and northern Indian Ocean basin. That level of thermal change in that volume of water is producing accelerated evaporation at a scale that is overwhelming normal atmospheric moisture cycling. In practical terms, the Indian Ocean is essentially generating its own weather system right now, independent of normal climate patterns. The rain that fell in Chennai and Colombo is not coming from seasonal weather. It is coming from superheated ocean water feeding a chemically contaminated atmosphere. And what goes up as evaporation will come down as precipitation somewhere, to someone.
14 hours into our coverage, and I need to read you something that arrived through our emergency message system about 20 minutes ago. This is from a listener who says they are a professor of ethics at a university in Bangalore, currently sheltering in place with their family. They write, "I have spent 20 years teaching my students about the moral weight of intervention, about the difference between action and hubris, about the moment when human beings decide they know better than the systems that built them. I never imagined I would be alive the day an argument from a graduate seminar became a news bulletin. My daughter is asleep in the next room. She is 8 years old. I am sitting in the dark because the power went out an hour ago and listening to your broadcast on a battery radio. Please don't stop talking. As long as someone is talking, the world is still making sense. We will not stop talking."
The power grid situation Sierra alluded to in that message is becoming one of the most critical infrastructural dimensions of this crisis. In the last 3 hours, power generation has failed in significant portions of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, which we will address specifically in a moment, the eastern coast of Tanzania, and the coastal districts of the Indian states of Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. The failure mechanism varies by location, but shares a common thread. The acidic precipitation is attacking unprotected electrical infrastructure, transformer stations, substation housing, high voltage line insulation. In some cases, the chemical interaction with metal components is accelerating corrosion at a rate that the systems were simply never designed to withstand. This is not storm damage. This is chemical degradation of infrastructure on a massive scale. And it is happening faster than repair crews can respond.
I need to speak directly about the Maldives now, because what is happening there requires its own moment of recognition. The Maldives, a nation of approximately 530 islands, home to roughly 500,000 people, with a maximum elevation above sea level of less than 2 meters on most islands. is facing a combination of threats that is, I will not use any other word, existential. The thermal expansion of the Indian Ocean combined with the atmospheric pressure changes above it have elevated sea level around the Maldives by an estimated 63 centimeters since the onset of the anomaly. On the lowest lying islands, the ocean has already reached residential areas. The government of the Maldives has declared a national emergency and has requested immediate international humanitarian assistance. Evacuation flights are being organized, but the chemical contamination of the atmosphere is complicating air operations. We have no confirmed casualty count from the Maldives yet. We are working to get one.
We are now approaching the 16-hour mark of our coverage, and I want to give you an updated casualty estimate. This is a difficult number to deliver and a difficult number to hear, but it is necessary. Confirmed dead across all affected regions currently stands at approximately 14,300 individuals. That number has roughly quadrupled in the last 7 hours. The majority of additional deaths, beyond the initial respiratory fatalities, are now coming from 3 new categories. First, drowning and flood-related deaths as sea level displacement affects low-lying coastal communities. Second, infrastructure collapse, specifically building failures in areas where the acid precipitation has attacked structural materials. Third, medical system overload. Hospitals in Dhaka, Chennai, Colombo, Dar es Salaam, and Medan are reporting that they have exceeded capacity and are unable to accept further patients. People are dying in parking lots and in the streets outside emergency rooms.
Medical system overload. That phrase lands very differently when you've spoken to the nurse in Chennai who sent us that message hours ago. I wonder if she is still on shift. I think about all the people like her right now. The doctors, the paramedics, the hospital administrators trying to decide who gets a bed and who does not, who are doing the hardest, most impossible work in conditions that were inconceivable when they showed up for their shift yesterday. We've received a secondary message from a listener in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, who writes, I am a doctor. We have run out of oxygen cylinders. We have run out of the topical burn treatment. I treated a 7-year-old girl this afternoon using clean water and cloth because I had nothing else. She survived, but I don't know for how long. We need supplies. We need to tell someone we need supplies. To that doctor, we hear you. We are reading your message on air right now because it is the most important thing we can do with it.
We have just received an extraordinary statement from the Prime Minister of Australia, one of the founding member nations of Project Helios Arc. I'll read it in full. Quote, the government of Australia acknowledges its role as a co-signatory and co-funding nation of Project Helios Arc. We are devastated by the unfolding events and take responsibility for our participation in the decision to authorize the experiment. Australia is immediately committing $500 million in emergency humanitarian aid to affected nations and is dispatching naval vessels and air assets to assist with evacuation and supply operations in the Indian Ocean region. We are working with international partners to understand the full scope of what has occurred and will cooperate fully with any and all inquiries. To the people suffering right now because of decisions made in chambers they were never part of, I am sorry. That is inadequate, but it is true. End quote. That statement, Alex, that final sentence, is remarkable for a sitting head of government.
It is. And it raises a question that I think will define the politics of whatever world emerges from this, assuming a world does emerge from this. Who decided? 11 nations signed on to Project Helios Arc. Those nations have populations, parliaments, citizens, but the decision to proceed with full-scale deployment was made by a technical committee of 47 scientists and 8 government representatives. 47 scientists and 8 government representatives made a decision that is now killing people in their tens of thousands across the Indian Ocean basin. I am not saying this to assign blame in a moment of crisis. I am saying it because the people listening to us in the dark, in the shelters, in the parking lots of overwhelmed hospitals, they deserve to understand the structure of the decision that brought them here.
It is now 22 hours since the first public reports emerged, and we have a significant update on the physical scope of the atmospheric phenomenon. The primary convection ring, which we described earlier as centered above the northern Indian Ocean, has expanded. Current satellite data, which our meteorology team is analyzing in real time, shows that the ring now extends from its original diameter of approximately 1,800 kilometers to a current diameter of just over 3,000 kilometers. At its northern edge, it now touches the coastal zones of Pakistan and Iran. At its western edge, it has reached the Horn of Africa. At its eastern edge, the ring is approaching the Strait of Malacca. The expansion rate has not slowed, and a secondary atmospheric anomaly, a smaller related formation, has been identified developing over the western equatorial Pacific Ocean, northeast of the Philippines. If the modeling holds, these two formations could merge within 72 to 96 hours.
We're now into our second day of coverage, and the situation in the Maldives has resolved in the most tragic possible sense. We have confirmed through direct contact with the Maldivian National Disaster Management Authority that 18 of the nation's inhabited atolls in the southern and central groupings are no longer accessible by any means. They are underwater. Evacuation of those islands was incomplete when the sea level rise accelerated overnight. We do not yet have confirmed casualty numbers from those specific islands, and I find that unknowing to be one of the hardest parts of sitting in this chair right now. We know that people live there. We know the water came. We do not yet know how many of them made it out.
Day 2, approximately 30 hours in. I want to give a broad geographic summary of the crisis as it stands. In South Asia, Bangladesh is in a state of near-total coastal collapse, with the low-lying coastal districts of Khulna and Barisal reporting catastrophic flooding that is being driven by both sea level displacement and the extraordinary volume of precipitation generated by the thermal event. The government of Bangladesh has ordered the evacuation of an estimated 12 million people from coastal zones, which is an evacuation order of a scale that has no historical precedent. India's eastern coastline from West Bengal to Tamil Nadu is under an emergency quarantine order due to chemical precipitation contamination. Over 40 million people are affected by that order. In East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and Somalia are experiencing the western edge of the atmospheric event, with acid precipitation now documented from Mogadishu in the north to Dar es Salaam in the south. Power infrastructure failure is now total in Somalia.
40 million people under a quarantine order in India alone. 12 million evacuees ordered in Bangladesh. And I want to name something that does not often get named in the abstract language of crisis management. Most of those people have nowhere to go. The evacuation order in Bangladesh is real and it is necessary. But the infrastructure required to move 12 million people, the roads, the vehicles, the fuel, the receiving communities with food and shelter, that infrastructure simply does not exist at that scale. What is actually happening based on reports from our correspondents in Dhaka is that people are walking, carrying what they can, moving north and inland because north and inland is away from the water. Family groups of 6 and 8 and 12 people moving on foot along roads that are already overcrowded and in some areas chemically compromised by the rainfall.
Day 3 of our coverage. 48 hours since the first public acknowledgement of the crisis, and we have a major development to report on the scientific dimension of what is happening. The International Panel for Atmospheric Response, an emergency body convened specifically to address this crisis, drawing scientists from 31 nations, has released its first technical assessment. I want to walk through the key findings carefully. First, the cascade reversal in the aerosol network is confirmed as irreversible by current means. The peroxysulfate compound in the upper stratosphere has achieved what the report calls chemical self-propagation. It is now generating its own precursor compounds faster than atmospheric processes can break them down. In plainer terms, even if every single aerosol delivery node were somehow neutralized tomorrow, the compound already in the atmosphere would continue producing reactive precipitation for an estimated minimum of 4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months. I want to let our listeners sit with that number, not 4 to 6 days. 4 to 6 months of chemically aggressive precipitation across an expanding geographic footprint on a planet whose coastal regions are already experiencing accelerated sea level displacement from a thermally destabilized ocean. When I read that assessment, the word that came to me was not panic, it was grief. Because there is a difference between a catastrophe that ends and a catastrophe that is going to take months to finish what it has started. And the people caught inside those months, the 12 million walking north out of Bangladesh, the families on the atolls that are no longer above water, the doctor in Dar es Salaam with no oxygen cylinders. They are going to live, or not live, inside those months.
By day 4, the casualty numbers have crossed into territory that requires a fundamental shift in how we talk about this event. Confirmed dead, 112,000. That number represents a 10-fold increase in 48 hours and is driven primarily by 4 factors. The catastrophic flooding of coastal Bangladesh, where the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta region has been effectively submerged by the combination of sea level rise and extraordinary precipitation. The failure of the Kaptai Dam in southeastern Bangladesh, which released a flood wave downstream that swept through a refugee corridor. We are told tens of thousands of people were in that corridor when the dam failed. Chemical precipitation deaths in coastal Somalia and Tanzania, which lacked any meaningful protective infrastructure. And mass casualty events at several overwhelmed hospitals in Chennai and Kolkata, where power failure led to the failure of critical care equipment.
The Kaptai Dam. I have to speak about that specifically. The Kaptai Dam failure happened at approximately 3 in the morning local time, which means it happened in the dark to people who were already displaced, who were already frightened, who were sleeping in the open because their homes were in a flood zone. A wave of water in the dark, in the rain that burns. I keep thinking about the sounds, the way people who survive such things describe the sound first. The low roar from upstream that arrives before the water and tells you something enormous is coming without telling you what to do about it. And then there is either the story of after or there isn't. For a very great number of people who were in that corridor on that night, there is no story of after.
Day 5. The atmospheric anomaly has continued its expansion and has now made formal contact with what I would describe as a second tier of affected nations. The western edge of the primary convection ring has crossed the Horn of Africa and is now generating precipitation events along the coast of Djibouti and Eritrea. The northern edge has reached the Sindh coast of Pakistan, where the port city of Karachi, home to over 16 million people, is now experiencing its first acid precipitation events. We have also received confirmation that the secondary anomaly we mentioned forming over the western Pacific has strengthened and is now a discrete, independent formation centered northeast of the Philippines. The government of the Philippines has declared a national state of calamity. The cities of Davao, Cebu, and coastal Metro Manila are under evacuation advisories. Japan's meteorological agency has issued an extraordinary atmospheric advisory for the Ryukyu Islands chain.
Day 5 also brings us the first statements from nations that are not directly in the impact zone, but are watching this unfold with, I think it is safe to say, a kind of horror that is deeply personal. The Secretary General of the United Nations has convened an Emergency Security Council session, the 5th in 5 days. And the United States has committed 12 naval vessels, 4 hospital ships, and airlift capacity for emergency supply operations to affected regions. China has deployed its South Sea Fleet in a humanitarian capacity and is coordinating with the Philippines government on evacuation of coastal Luzon. Russia has offered chemical neutralization experts. But I want to sit with this for a moment. The world's militaries and governments are responding. They are moving ships and planes and people. And yet the fundamental problem, the 4 to 6 months of compound in the stratosphere, the ocean temperatures, the ongoing sea level displacement, none of that is addressed by ships and planes. The response is managing the symptoms of something the cause of which we cannot yet reach.
1 week in, and I need to give you a number I have been dreading delivering since we first went on air. Confirmed dead, 438,000. Estimated dead, including the unreported and unreachable, between 800,000 and 1.2 million. The Maldives has been effectively lost as a functioning nation-state. 36 of its 42 inhabited atolls are now fully submerged or uninhabitable due to the combination of sea level displacement and chemical contamination. The government of the Maldives is operating in exile from a vessel in the southern Indian Ocean. 43,000 Maldivian citizens have been evacuated to Sri Lanka, Australia, and India. Approximately 12,000 remain unaccounted for. The president of the Maldives, in a statement delivered from the deck of an Indian naval frigate, said, quote, "We were a nation. We are still a people. The ocean has taken our land. It has not taken us." End quote.
We are 10 days into this crisis, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge something about the nature of what we are covering. When a disaster unfolds over days and weeks rather than hours, there is a particular psychological weight that falls on those who are not directly in its path. The listeners who are safe, whose cities have not yet been touched. There is guilt in safety. There is a kind of helplessness that comes from watching something enormous unfold in real time and having no lever to pull. We have received thousands of messages through our emergency line, people offering their homes, people asking how to donate, people asking whether their relatives in the affected regions are alive, people who are simply frightened and need to hear a voice. To everyone who has written to us, we read every message. We cannot answer them all, but we read them, and they matter, and the people in those messages matter.
Day 11. The atmospheric picture has shifted again, and I want to be very direct with you about what this means. Overnight, the primary convection ring and the Western Pacific secondary anomaly did not merge, but they have begun to interact at their respective edges in a way that the International Panel for Atmospheric Response describes as synergistic amplification. What that means in practical terms, the combined thermal energy being generated by both formations is now sufficient to drive the peroxysulfate precipitation beyond the tropical and subtropical zones in which it has been primarily concentrated. We are seeing the first documented acid precipitation events in southern Thailand, in the coastal regions of Myanmar, and this is significant, in the Western Australian city of Perth. Perth is at 32 degrees south latitude. This is the furthest poleward the chemical precipitation has yet extended.
Perth is a city of 2 million people, and it is also a city that is geographically very far from Bangladesh and the Maldives and the Java Sea. When Perth begins to see acid rain, the crisis is no longer a tragedy happening in one part of the world that the rest of the world is watching. It is a crisis that has arrived in Australia. It has arrived in a wealthy, developed city with good infrastructure, and it is still deeply frightening for the people there. I think about what it means for this to reach Perth, because it suggests a trajectory. If the phenomenon is moving poleward, if it is expanding north and south simultaneously, then the question of which nations are safe is not a settled question. It is a question with a receding answer.
2 weeks into the crisis, Confirmed dead, 2,140,000. The numbers have crossed a threshold that makes the word confirmed feel almost inadequate, because large portions of the affected regions have lost communications infrastructure entirely and simply cannot report. Bangladesh has effectively ceased to exist as a functioning government for approximately a third of its territory. The coastal and southern districts of the country are, I want to use this word carefully and accurately, submerged, not flooded in the temporary sense. The combination of sea level displacement and sustained extreme precipitation has produced a condition in which the land itself is no longer accessible. The Bengal Tiger Wildlife Reserve in the Sundarbans, which had already been one of the most climate-vulnerable ecosystems on Earth, is gone. More importantly, the communities that surrounded it, fishing villages, farming communities, river towns, are gone.
Gone. That word carries so much. And I want to name, alongside the enormous loss of human life, the cultural dimension of what is being erased. The Sundarbans were not just an ecosystem. They were the home of generations of people who built their lives in relationship with a very specific, very particular landscape. The knowledge of how to navigate those waterways. The language developed to describe a world where land and water were always in conversation. The songs and the stories rooted in the mangrove forests. That knowledge, that culture, those stories, they exist only in the memories of the people who carry them. And some of those people are gone too. We are not just losing lives. We are losing worlds.
16 days in, a development that demands immediate attention. The government of India has announced that it is withdrawing from the International Climate Science Consortium, the body that authorized Project Helios Arc. This is the first formal withdrawal by a major affected nation, and it is being interpreted by diplomatic analysts as the first move toward formal international legal proceedings against the consortium and its member nations. India's statement is direct. Quote, "The government of India holds the ICSC and its member nations directly responsible for the deaths of more than 1.4 million Indian citizens in the states of Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, and Odisha. We will pursue all available legal and diplomatic remedies. We call upon the international community to recognize this event for what it is, the largest human-caused disaster in recorded history." End quote.
Day 18. And I want to share with you an account that came to us through a relay. Our direct communication lines to the region are compromised, from a school teacher in the city of Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. She writes through intermediaries that she is sheltering with 63 children, ages 6 through 14, in a reinforced government building 3 kilometers inland from the coast. She says the children have been singing. She says they sing every morning and every evening whatever songs they know, school songs, folk songs, prayers set to music, because it is the only way she has found to stop the sound of the rain and the water from being the only sound they hear. She says one child, a 9-year-old boy, has taken it upon himself to keep a daily count of how many people come to the building looking for shelter, and to greet each person by name once they have given it. She says his name is Rafi. She says he has not missed a single person, and she would like Rafi's family, if they are listening, to know that he is safe and he is brave and he is taking care of everyone.
3 weeks into the crisis, the global death toll has crossed 5 million, and the International Panel for Atmospheric Response has delivered its second formal assessment, and it is the most consequential document produced so far. I want to read its central conclusion directly. Quote, "The peroxysulfate cascade initiated by the Project Helios Arc system failure has achieved a stable atmospheric state that cannot be reversed by any currently available intervention. The compound's self-propagation mechanism will continue at current or greater intensity for an estimated minimum period of 7 to 9 months from the date of this assessment. During this period, the geographic footprint of acute chemical precipitation will continue to expand poleward at a rate of approximately 2 degrees latitude per week. By the 5th month of the event, precipitation events of significant chemical intensity will be documented as far north as the Korean Peninsula, the Mediterranean coast, and the Gulf Coast of North America, and as far south as the southern cone of South America." End quote. I want to be honest with you. That assessment changes what kind of crisis this is.
It does. It changes it from a regional catastrophe, devastating, enormous, the worst thing that has happened in living memory, to something that has no regional boundary. A 2-degree per week poleward expansion means that within 4 months the chemical precipitation will reach Berlin, London, Moscow, New York. Not at the same intensity as it is hitting Dhaka and Chennai right now, but present, measurable, dangerous enough to further strain the systems of nations that are currently mobilizing as helpers rather than victims. The helpers will need help. And I think we have to sit with what that means for the question of international response, because the calculus of international solidarity changes when the solidarity being asked for is solidarity with something that is arriving at your own doorstep.
Day 20. I want to walk our listeners through the state of global evacuation efforts as they stand tonight, because I think this is one of the dimensions of this crisis that has not received the systematic attention it deserves. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has declared this the largest displacement event in recorded human history, surpassing the combined refugee counts of every conflict of the 20th century. Current figures: approximately 47 million people have been formally registered as internally displaced within their own nations. An additional 9 million have crossed international borders and are registered in host countries. An estimated 20 to 30 million more are in transit, on foot, on boats, in vehicles, moving without formal registration, without formal destination, away from the water and the rain. The logistical demands of this movement, the food, the clean water, the medical care, the shelter, are beyond the capacity of any existing humanitarian framework. The World Food Program has estimated that it can currently meet approximately 31% of the caloric need in active displacement zones.
31%. 2 out of every 3 displaced people are not receiving adequate food from formal aid systems. And I want to be clear about what fills that gap, because it is not nothing. It is people. It is communities along evacuation routes who are opening their homes and their stores. It is farmers in the Indian highlands sharing their stores because the people walking past their fields are hungry. It is a kind of informal, enormous, uncountable act of collective human decency that is happening right now, in parallel with the governmental and military responses, largely unreported. We received a message from a listener in a small town in Assam, northeastern India, who wrote, "We have 900 people sleeping in our community center, our temple, and our school. We do not know most of their names yet, but we know they are hungry and we are feeding them. My mother made 700 chapatis this morning. She says she will make 700 more tomorrow." That woman and her 700 chapatis will not appear in the casualty reports or the geopolitical analyses. She is still the story.
Day 22. A significant geophysical development to report. The thermal anomaly in the Indian Ocean has now been measured at an average of 14.3 degrees Celsius above seasonal baseline, nearly double the reading from the first days of the crisis. This level of thermal energy input into a major ocean basin is producing effects beyond the precipitation cycle. Ocean circulation patterns, the deep current systems that regulate heat distribution across the entire planet, are being disrupted. Specifically, the thermohaline circulation in the Indian Ocean has been significantly destabilized, and there are early indications that this disruption may be beginning to affect the Atlantic thermohaline circulation at its southern connection point. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, the system of ocean currents that keeps Western Europe significantly warmer than its latitude would otherwise permit, is showing stress indicators that have not been observed at this level since the last glacial period. Day 23. I want to walk our listeners through the state of global evacuation efforts as they stand tonight, because I think this is one of the dimensions of this crisis that has not received the systematic attention it deserves. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has declared this the largest displacement event in recorded human history, surpassing the combined refugee counts of every conflict of the 20th century. Current figures: approximately 47 million people have been formally registered as internally displaced within their own nations. An additional 9 million have crossed international borders and are registered in host countries. An estimated 20 to 30 million more are in transit, on foot, on boats, in vehicles, moving without formal registration, without formal destination, away from the water and the rain. The logistical demands of this movement, the food, the clean water, the medical care, the shelter, are beyond the capacity of any existing humanitarian framework. The World Food Program has estimated that it can currently meet approximately 31% of the caloric need in active displacement zones.
31%. 2 out of every 3 displaced people are not receiving adequate food from formal aid systems. And I want to be clear about what fills that gap, because it is not nothing. It is people. It is communities along evacuation routes who are opening their homes and their stores. It is farmers in the Indian highlands sharing their stores because the people walking past their fields are hungry. It is a kind of informal, enormous, uncountable act of collective human decency that is happening right now, in parallel with the governmental and military responses largely unreported. We received a message from a listener in a small town in Assam, northeastern India, who wrote, "We have 900 people sleeping in our community center, our temple, and our school. We do not know most of their names yet, but we know they are hungry and we are feeding them. My mother made 700 chapatis this morning. She says she will make 700 more tomorrow." That woman and her 700 chapatis will not appear in the casualty reports or the geopolitical analyses. She is still the story.
Day 24 brings us a development in the military and infrastructure dimension of this crisis that I want to address carefully and factually. 3 nations, India, Pakistan, and Indonesia, have invoked force majeure clauses in their defense cooperation agreements to redeploy military assets from international commitments to domestic crisis management. What that means practically: Indian Army units that were part of international peacekeeping operations have been recalled. The Indonesian Navy has withdrawn from joint maritime exercises to focus on evacuation operations in the Java Sea and around the Lesser Sunda Islands. Pakistan has closed its northern border to undocumented crossings and has deployed the Pakistan Army to the Sindh coastal region to manage what officials are describing as critical infrastructure protection. In practical terms, the protection of the Karachi water treatment system and the coastal power stations from civil disorder as the city absorbs an influx of refugees from the south. None of these moves are hostile in intent. All of them are understandable. Collectively, they represent the inward turn of nations under pressure, the point at which the international system of cooperation begins to contract toward national self-interest, not out of malice but out of necessity.
The contraction Alex describes is visible not just in military policy, but in the lived experience of people trying to cross borders right now. Our correspondents have documented situations at the India-Bangladesh border crossings, where families who have been walking for 4 and 5 days arrive at a gate that has been closed for 12 hours. They are not turned away with violence in most cases. They are simply told the processing center is full. Come back in the morning. And so they camp beside the road in the rain that still falls and still burns, and they wait for morning. Among those waiting at the Benapole crossing last night was, according to a relief worker who contacted us, an elderly man traveling with his granddaughter. The man is blind. The child is 11 years old. She has been guiding him for 6 days on foot from their home in the Khulna district. When a relief worker offered to help carry their bag, the girl reportedly said very politely that she had been managing fine and she would continue to manage. She had her grandfather's hand and she knew where she was going.
Day 25. And I want to give our listeners a complete accounting of what has been lost from the map of the world, because I think we owe that accounting. The Maldives, effectively gone as a physical nation. 43,000 survivors relocated to foreign territory. 12,000 remain unaccounted for. The coastal districts of Bangladesh, south of Dhaka, submerged, uninhabitable. Population loss in those areas estimated between 4 and 6 million people, the majority from the combination of flooding and the Kaptai Dam catastrophe. The coastal plain of Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh in India, chemically contaminated to a degree that renders it unsuitable for agriculture or human habitation for an unknown period. This is approximately 150,000 square kilometers of India's most densely populated agricultural land. The northern coast of Somalia. Infrastructure collapse is total. The government of Somalia, which was already fragile, has effectively dissolved. Control of the region is fragmented between humanitarian organizations, neighboring military forces, and local armed groups. Day 27. We are receiving the first reports of large-scale social breakdown in cities that are not yet directly in the heaviest precipitation zone, but are experiencing the second-order effects of the crisis. In Mumbai, India, a city of over 20 million people, the combination of massive refugee inflows from the south, power rationing driven by the destruction of coastal generation capacity, and the breakdown of food supply chains has produced civil disorder that the Indian Army has been deployed to manage. There have been clashes between security forces and civilian populations in several Mumbai neighborhoods. We have reports, unconfirmed, of at least 12 deaths in those clashes. In Bangkok, Thailand, where the chemical precipitation events have intensified over the last week, the government has imposed a curfew between the hours of 10 in the evening and 6 in the morning. The curfew is reportedly not being observed in the outer districts of the city.
I want to address something that I think is happening in many of our listeners' minds right now, because I can feel it in the messages we're receiving, and it is a real thing that deserves a real response. There's a form of psychological withdrawal that happens in the face of numbers that become too large to hold. 5 million dead, 2 million displaced, 150,000 square kilometers of contaminated land. At some point, the numbers stop feeling like people and start feeling like quantities, and that transition, that moment when grief becomes arithmetic, is one of the most human responses to the inhuman scale of catastrophe. I want to resist it, and I want to invite our listeners to resist it with me. 5 million is 5 million individuals, each with a first day of school and a favorite meal and a person they love the most. The enormity is not a reason to stop counting. It is a reason to count more carefully.
Day 29. We are approaching the 1-month mark of this event, and the International Panel for Atmospheric Response has published a comprehensive assessment that I need to walk through with you in detail, because it represents the clearest picture of what has happened and what is going to happen that we have yet received. The assessment confirms the following. Project Helios Arc's cascade failure was the direct and sole cause of the atmospheric event. The initial error was a miscalculation in the aerosol compound mixing ratio at a production facility in Osaka, Japan, a facility that was operating under a time pressure to meet deployment deadlines and that reduced quality verification protocols without authorization. The miscalculation produced an aerosol compound with a 10.3% higher reactive sulfate concentration than specified. At scale, across 4,700 delivery nodes, that 10.3% difference was sufficient to trigger the cascade. A 10.3% error in a spreadsheet. That is what has brought us here.
A 10.3% error. I want to hold that alongside the number we carry into this final accounting. Confirmed dead as of this morning, 7,642,000 estimated total dead, including those lost in regions where communication and reporting are no longer possible, between 9 and 11 million. The error that killed 9 to 11 million people was not malice. It was not sabotage. It was a production facility cutting corners on verification to meet a deadline, and no one catching it before it went into the sky. And once it was in the sky became something else. Something that kills.
The panel's assessment also provides its most detailed projection yet of the crisis's future trajectory. And this is where I have to deliver the most difficult news I have delivered in this broadcast. The projection is this. The peroxysulfate cascade will continue for an estimated 8 to 10 months from its initiation point, which means 4 to 6 months remain from today. During those remaining months, the geographic footprint will expand to cover, the panel's words, all continental coastlines and lowland regions within 30 degrees of the equator, with significant event frequency extending to 50 degrees north and south latitude. That is a footprint that encompasses most of the world's most densely populated regions. However, and this is the one window of conditional hope in the report, the compound's intensity will begin to diminish after the 6th month. The final 2 to 4 months will still involve active precipitation events, but at significantly reduced concentrations. The ocean thermal anomaly will begin to dissipate as the compound thins, and normal thermohaline circulation, barring permanent disruption, which the panel assesses as possible but not inevitable, should resume within 2 to 3 years of the event's conclusion.
4 to 6 months remaining. Diminishing intensity. A world that survives, but survives as something it wasn't before. I want to speak about what that world looks like right now, 1 month in, because the final accounting is not just about the dead. The Maldives as a sovereign territory is gone. Its government has applied for recognition of a new national territory to be established on land granted by Sri Lanka and Australia in a joint humanitarian arrangement. Bangladesh has lost its coastal identity. The Delta civilization that built itself over centuries on the relationship between land and the Bay of Bengal is irreversibly altered. Over 8 million Bangladeshis remain displaced and are distributed across India, Myanmar, Nepal, and international refugee camps. Coastal Somalia is, for the foreseeable future, ungoverned territory. The Philippines' central islands are severely damaged and are currently under joint military humanitarian administration.
I also want to give you a clear-eyed picture of what nations have been, in the terminology of the disaster management community, lost, meaning that they exist in name and in international recognition, but no longer exist as functioning, territorially coherent nation-states within their previous boundaries. In full, the Maldives, as discussed. The Pacific island nation of Kiribati, which was already the world's most climate-vulnerable sovereign state before this crisis, has lost all but 3 of its 33 atolls to the sea level displacement event. 8,000 of Kiribati's approximately 120,000 citizens have died. The remainder have been evacuated to Fiji and New Zealand. Tuvalu, similarly, is functionally gone as a territory. The coastal districts of Bangladesh, comprising roughly a third of the nation's pre-crisis territory, are no longer accessible, and the low-lying areas of the Indonesian provinces of North Sumatra and West Papua coastal regions have been rendered uninhabitable by the combination of chemical contamination and sea level changes.
And what remains? That is the question I want to answer, because this broadcast has to end somewhere, and I think it has to end in truth. which means it cannot end only in grief. What remains is most of the world, most of the people, a staggered, traumatized, diminished, but surviving world. The nations that built Project Helios Arc, Australia, Germany, Japan, Canada, Brazil, South Korea, and the others, they are damaged. Their coastal regions are affected, their political systems are convulsing under the weight of accountability, and their international reputations have been permanently altered. But they are standing. The nations that bore the cost, Bangladesh, the Maldives, Somalia, India's coastal states, the island nations of the Pacific, they are diminished in ways that will take generations to understand fully. But their people are alive. Many of them are alive. And the ones who are alive are, like the school teacher and the children in Cox's Bazaar, singing in the morning and counting the new arrivals and granting each one the dignity of a name.
Final confirmed death toll from Project Helios Arc's cascade failure. 1 month into the event. 7,642,000 confirmed. Estimated total, including regions where reporting has been rendered impossible by infrastructure collapse, between 9 and 11 million. Nations lost as functioning territories. The Maldives, Kiribati, Tuvalu, and the coastal district sovereignty of Bangladesh, with permanent territorial loss estimated at approximately 900,000 square kilometers of previously inhabited land across all affected nations combined. The cause? A 10.3% error in aerosol compound concentration at an unauthorized production protocol deviation, introduced at a facility in Osaka, Japan, amplified across a global deployment network into a cascade that no single intervention point could halt once initiated. The mechanism: a self-propagating peroxysulfate compound in the lower stratosphere, generating chemically aggressive precipitation across an expanding equatorial and subtropical geographic footprint, interacting with thermally destabilized ocean systems to produce secondary effects, including accelerated sea level displacement, infrastructure destruction by chemical corrosion, and the devastation of regional food and water systems.
The ending of the story is not the kind of ending that closes cleanly. It is the kind of ending that becomes a beginning of something different. A world in which the experiment happened, in which the error was made, in which the decision was taken by 47 scientists and 8 government representatives on behalf of 8 billion people, and in which the accounting for all of that is still being made and will be made for the rest of the century. But I want to close with something that I think is true and that I think is important to say on a radio broadcast at the end of a month like this one. The world that exists tonight is a world that has been through something. It is diminished and it is changed, and in some places it is broken in ways that will not be repaired. And it is also a world full of people who did not stop. The nurse in Chennai who stayed on shift. The doctor in Dar es Salaam who used clean water and cloth. The teacher in Cox's Bazaar who taught 63 children to sing in the rain. The 9-year-old boy named Rafi who greeted every stranger by name. They did not stop. That is not a comfort for what was lost, but it is a fact about what remains.
This has been Silent Waves Radio's continuous live coverage of the Project Helios Arc Cascade event. We have been on air for 30 days. We will remain on air. To our listeners who are in the affected regions, we see you. We have not stopped saying your names. To our listeners who are watching from a distance, the distance is smaller than it was a month ago, and in 4 to 6 months, it may be smaller still. Stay informed. Stay together. This is Alex Mercer.
And this is Sierra Lane. Silent Waves Radio will continue our coverage through the remainder of the event and into whatever comes after. There is always an after, even now, especially now.
Stay with us.